to the September Bench Report. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about the music that I'm going to be playing this coming Thursday night. I'm back at the organ here at St. Barb's, and I'm going to be playing some music by Johann Bach. I did play some by him earlier this year in April, and of course he as a composer was very prolific. If you caught any of that bench report, he wrote a lot of music, and so I'm doing some more of it this month. So the music I'm going to be playing this coming Thursday night are two of his French suites, which are they're groups of music that were written for keyboard. And they could be played on the organ, but mostly they're played or written for a different type of instrument, such as the harpsichord or the clavichord. The naming of in the manuscripts that survive indicate that they were written for, the word used was clavecin, which is the French word for keyboard at the time. Timing wise, we're looking at the Baroque period. If you don't remember, Bach was born in 1685 and he passed away in 1750. So his life encompassed the Baroque period, and the bulk of his work was composed in the late Baroque period. Let's see here. So the French suites were written mostly for keyboard types of instruments, the lighter keyboard instruments like the harpsichord and the clavichord, as I stated. And these particular works, they're groups of pieces, and they're multi-sectional groups of pieces, which the names typically are named by some sort of dance. And of course, the tradition of the suite as a composition, it goes back to even the medieval times, or the roots of it anyway. But, excuse me, in the French suite, the basic form, you have four basic dances. You have the Allemande, which is a German dance. You have the Courante, which is a French dance, or sometimes you have, instead of the Courante, you have the Corrente, which is an Italian dance. I will hit on the difference between those in a moment. Then the third one you have is the sarabande, which is a Spanish dance, a slow, stately Spanish dance. And then the fourth one, which is usually the final dance of the set, that is the Gigue, which is an English dance. Now these dances generally follow that form. You start out with the slower Allemande, move to the faster Courante or the Corrente, and then you move into the sarabande, which is slower, more stately. And then before you get to the Gigue, which is very fast generally, you may have other dances put in there as well, such as the Louet or the Minuet and Trio, or some of the others we've got that we'll be hearing on Thursday night. We have a bourrée, a gavotte, an anglais. So this order of slow, fast, that idea is what stems out of the medieval period, back when there were dances paired together. You had a slower, stately dance, and that was followed by a faster dance. The purpose of these dances, had a social purpose. The slower dance, the women would use that slower, stately dance to show off their grace, show off their costumes, their dresses, what they were wearing. And then, of course, the faster dance that followed that was used as a dance for the men to show off their dancing skills. So, and the names of the dances of back then, there weren't a whole lot of, well, we have documented anyway from back then. We're talking like the 1200s, so way back before Bach. Pretty simple. So like in German, for example, the pair of those dances would be called, for example, Tanz and Nachttanz, translating literally as dance and after dance. In Italy, you're going to have names like Passamezzo or Saltarello, or followed by Saltarello. Those are particular types of dances from Italy. And in England, you might have a pavane, which is actually, I think, has French roots, followed by a galliard, which is a faster English dance. So this idea of slow, fast starts way back then, and over the centuries, it kind of grows a bit as various composers, musicians in general, start to add extra dances to this pair. So basic premise of the suite organization, by the time we get the suite as a composition later on the Baroque period, is you have the slower stately dance followed by a faster dance, and then it kind of alternates from there. So slow, fast, that kind of idea. So, okay, now a few things I wanted to mention. Now, of course, German music has largely been influenced by music of both the Italian and the French areas. Of course, back then, with the way the church kind of ruled the social life, the Catholic Church anyway, ruled the social life, it's the place of the papacy would move back and forth between France and Italy. It hasn't always just been in Rome. It's been in France as well, and I forget the name of the city, I'm sorry, but I will look that up later. But anyway, so German musicians, as they were part of the Holy Roman Empire, had a tremendous amount of exposure to music from both sides, really, from the Italian side and the French side. And of course, German musicians also tended to travel a lot to listen to other musicians. Well, they all did, but the Germans in particular, they brought back a lot of ideas to the German areas with them. And I know there's one question that somebody might have here. Well, why would it matter how the French and the Italian styles are affecting music in Germany? Well, think about it. If you have religious authority and political authority in France and Italy, meanwhile, Germany's up here in the middle, so to speak. And they're going back and forth. Typically what happens is whatever musical styles and musicians are employed in a capital city or any other city of significant political or religious importance, that music and those musicians are going to have a lot of impact on the other music in the area, because that's the music that's going to be heard. Those are the musicians' names that are going to be known. Those musicians are also the ones that are going to be performing for the public when that does happen. Mostly they're performing for just the papacy or the political people. But so the word gets around, And as there's all this money in these places of power, well, whose musical talents do you think are going to be developed more greatly, and the word about their music is going to be passed around more greatly? It's going to be those who are in the social milieu where all the money is, because they're getting all the support, as opposed to maybe somebody up in Germany who is just kind of working for himself or working for a local small church or something like that. You're not ever going to hear of somebody like that. So anyway, so back to what we're talking about tonight. The German musical style is influenced heavily by those two outside forces, the French and the Italians. Okay, now the next thing I wanted to go over is it is the kind of the formation of the suite as an entity. The concept of the suite didn't get that name until the Baroque era, per se. For several centuries, yeah. These groups of dances had been formulating. Composers were putting these together for different uses, mostly, of course, for the courts and for other entertainments. And then, of course, there were also teachers who were writing and composing. Bach, whose music we're playing Thursday, he was not only employed by several major churches, but he was also employed as a teacher as well. And like I said in my previous video back in April, much of his keyboard music was just turned out for his students. So we start out with the idea of the slow and the fast dance. Over the time, additional dances are added to that, and different composers, they could pick whatever dance they want to put together. At some point, there are three dances that start to become used more often, and that's the allemande and the courant and the sarabande. I mentioned those three already in the group of four that is typical of the structure of Bach's suites. And so for about 100 years, and we're looking at the 1600s, quite a few composers are writing with this group of dances. And it's not just keyboard composers either. It's also composers of the lute tradition. The lute is a stringed instrument, plucked strings, similar to the guitar, but a different body. And so anyway, we have the allemande and the courant and the sarabande. Those we have documented as early as the early 1600s. An example of one of the first collections was written by Johann Hermann Schein, a German, and he had this published in his collection Untitled Musicale in the year 1617. There were other composers who had some earlier ones as well, but he seems to have quite a few of them. Schein has quite a few of them in his as well. And some other composers that we have in that time also are, I'll find my notes here. Johann Erasmus Kindermann and also Matthias Beckmann, both German. Reminder, talking about the suites, we're focusing just on Germany tonight. Um, there are other suites written in other countries, but we're not going to be talking about that. So then eventually, the the jig makes it into play. And the jig is introduced, it's from, like I said earlier, it's from England. Kinnerman introduces a few of these in his suites. And then the composer who really is credited for establishing the sequence of the Allemand, Courant, and Sarabande and the jig is Johann Jakob Froberger. He has 30 keyboard suites in his repertoire that he churned out. And almost every single one of them uses the ACGS form, or ACSG form, the Allemand, Courant, Sarabande, and jig. So now we have two pairs of slow and fast dances, only they're alternating. But there's a spoiler. Part of this is a bit of a lie. And it's because Froberger himself did not actually write them in that order. He wrote them in the order of the Allemand, the Allemand, the Courant, the jig, and then the Sarabande. So he had slow, fast, fast, slow. That was his order. Why that is, we don't really know. There's no notes in any of the archival research yet that I've seen anyway that suggests why that is. And so then what happened was, this is a spoiler, is that 30 years after Froberger died, and that was what year? 1667. One of his publishers changed the order of the dances so that they would be slow, fast, slow, fast. So, Froberger had the four, but in his own little order of slow, fast, fast, slow, the Allemand, Courant, jig, and Sarabande. And his publishers swapped the last two. So then they were published Allemand, Courant, Sarabande, jig. Why would that be done? Well, that's another spoiler alert that is an unanswered question, actually. And the note by the publisher, let's see, let's make this a little dirty here. Let's put some dirt on this publisher's name. The publisher's name is Mortier and Roger. They're from Amsterdam. And they made the remark in their publication to put in better order. Because I just read the English translation. I'm not reading the French because I'll botch it. But anyway, that was on the title page of the earliest printed edition in the 1690s. So, so again, that's all we have on why that order was switched in Froberger's. But there's been no other evidence that has come forth to light as to why that is. Now, of course, so if Froberger's order was slightly off or slightly different to begin with, why is that ordering still important? Well, other German composers at that time, now we're in the early Baroque, they were also writing suites in the ACSG format, and those composers were, I keep losing my pages, doesn't make me happy. Okay, so those composers were Johan Pacobel, who some of you might be familiar with his name. He's well known for the famous Canon in D that is overplayed at weddings and whatever else. He's also a prominent organist. And Johan Pacobel, who wrote a lot of keyboard music, he had he had a bunch of suites in the ACS or G order, and Jörg Bohm also had suites in the Allman Courant Serlon G order, and Johann Caspar Ferdinand Fischer as well. Let's see here. One question that comes up with this, the naming of this suite. There have been different names for this group of dances. The suite comes from a French attribution in which, in the publication of the music, if you had a French publisher, that was their word that they typically used for a group of dances. So that's how we know Bach's works to be called as suites. By the time he was writing them, he called them suites. And there are another names, like on the Italian side, they called their groups of dances partitas. There were other groups of pieces that were called partitas as well. But so there was some fluidity in how the whole suite structure got put together over time as it evolved, not just in the ordering of the movements, but also the name. Okay, let's see here. I think that's all I wanted to touch on for the suite development in general. I'm going to move into discussing a little bit about the French suites by Bach. So I have here, I gotta have that space covered. Okay. So these are called the French suites. Bach wrote quite a few suites overall. He has what we know as the French suites. There are 6 of them in here. He also has a collection called the English suites, which there are 6 in there. He also has a collection called partitas, and there are 6 suites, or collections rather, in there. Now, of course, the 2 groups called suites, the French suites and the English suites, those, there's some other funny business as far as the naming of those go as well. You know, when you look at the names French suites and English suites, you kind of think, okay, so are these dances more in the French style, one group in the French style, or one group in the English style? No, they're not. So why are they called that? Well, again, that was another falsity by a publisher after the fact, and let's see here, and I have that note over here, just found that. Okay, so the publisher, I do not have the name of who had done that, who that's attributed to, but he had said that, well, the French suites are called the French suites because they sound more French, and the English suites are the English suites because they sound more English. No, not actually. Bach's writing is very international in general. And if you get back to what these dance movements are in the suites, each one is, well, named after its own kind of nationalistic flavor. The Allemande, let's go back to the core four. We've got the Allemande, you have the Courant, the Sarabande, and the G. Now, each one of those has its own kind of national derivation. The Allemande is a German dance, initially. The Courant is a French dance, unless of course you use the more faster style corrente, which is Italian. Then you have the sarabande, which is Spanish. Then you have the Gigue, which is English. So, and each one of these has that core group of 4 dances. Now there are other dances in here as well, and those are placed after the sarabande, before you get to the Gigue. The Gigue ends up being a finisher for all these dances. There, open that back up. There we go. So, so we end up with a variety of nationalities. Well, a variety for that time anyway. A variety, that being the time being the Baroque era, and Bach's dates are 1685 through 1750. His diversity quotient, his variety is going to be, of course, Germany, where he's from, and France on the west, the lower west, and Italy on the lower east, and then Germany on the upper west. That would be the northwest. So, and that's where a lot of the political power was concentrated, in those 4 places. And so over the centuries, that's what becomes those 4 are what become the core 4 dances. Now, of course, I did mention that there are other dances thrown in here as well. And I'm just going to tell you what some of them are. I did mention some of them earlier, but I wanted to, if I can find it, show you what some of them are. All right, there we go. All right, so we have another dance called a double. We have a passapied. Some of these names, I'm going to botch their pronunciation. I'm sorry, but it is what it is. A louré, an air, minuet and trio, which I mentioned previously, and a bourrée. Sometimes we'd see polonaise, and I forget the name that he used for that exactly. Oh, polonaise. So, and of course, polonaise, you know, that's of Polish origin. So not only do you have those core 4 countries that are represented, but sometimes you get the Eastern European areas represented as well. Okay, now, so for Bach, let's just review this real quick. His French suites start with the Allemande, then we have the Courant or the Corrente, then we have the sarabande, then we have a bunch of other dances, sometimes 3 or 4 of them, and then we end with a Gigue. I should also say too that in some of his other suites, he does have before the Allemande beginning, he has a prelude, but the prelude is, its basic function is not really a dance, it's more just kind of an introductory piece, you know, whether it's more atmospheric or it's the instrumentalist testing out the instrument. That is something I will dig into in a later video sometime next year when I start working on my harpsichord stuff and dig into the French harpsichord repertoire. But anyway, so, but I just wanted to mention that as a side. So now, of course, these keyboard suites of Bach, I mentioned they were written for keyboard instruments such as the clavichord and the harpsichord, which are much lighter duty instruments than something like this, the organ. Of course, the organs that Bach played on, well, he had a variety. He had the big church organs in the cathedrals that he worked in. He also had the smaller studio chamber organs that he used when he was teaching, which would be in much smaller rooms. But these lighter instruments that he wrote his keyboard works for, the harpsichord and the clavichord, by their nature, by how they're built and constructed, they're very soft sounding instruments. And you're not going to use them in a big space such as, well, basically like a church cathedral, or even one of your bigger churches here nowadays. You can try, but it's going to be pretty quiet. But that's mostly for solo work. Those instruments were used not just for solo literature, but also for ensemble literature. And the harpsichord, interestingly enough, because the strings were plucked, they kind of had a percussive effect, or they can have a percussive effect, depending how exactly the mechanisms inside the harpsichord are built. You know, the type of wire used for the strings, how the plucking mechanisms, the plectra, how they're shaped, if they pluck a string more harshly or if they're more gentle. There's lots of stuff that plays into that. But harpsichords used in ensemble situations typically are used for both for bass. Usually you're playing a bass line, you have some harmony on top. In the right hand, that would be called the continuo. And then of course just the overall sound is kind of plucky anyway. So kind of like if you can imagine somebody strumming a guitar, it's going to have a rhythmic effect to it. So anyway, but for solo work, such as the suites, because those instruments by their nature are very soft, they're going to be played usually in a smaller space. Not one as big as say for example, the sanctuary here at St. Barbara's, although if, say, hypothetically speaking, if I were to try to do something like that, well, the acoustics are pretty good in here, actually. I can hear, as I'm talking right now, I can hear my voice reverberating or echoing rather, pretty good in this place. It's not a long echo, and I'm not talking terribly loudly either. But whoever your audience is, if they're going to be able to hear what you're playing on the harpsichord, depending where the instrument is placed, if it's back here with the rest of our instruments, they're going to have to be pretty quiet. Now, if I were to, say, bring in my harpsichord, haul it in for my place, the best place for me to put it would be in the middle of the space, which you can't see from what you're looking at right now. But it would be about probably, I don't know, 30 feet from where I'm sitting, maybe 40 or 50. So anyway, so when I pick which settings, the point of this being, when I pick the settings for what I'm going to use to play these keyboard works, I'm not going to be using a full-blown organ combination like you might hear in a cathedral. I'm going to be using settings that are much lighter. And I'm just going to move this over a little bit. This will be hard to see because I can't tell my tablet to zoom in. But all these knobs here, there's about oh, I don't know, 30 some of them. And there's more over here on the right too. But the ones that I'm going to use for Thursday's recording is I'm going to use my 2 basic 8s. I'm going to use the softer of those 2. There's several different 8-foot stops on here. But I'm going to use the Gedakt on the swell. That's the upper keyboard. And I'm going to use, move this out of the way. I'm going to use the diapason. I hope I said that right. On the great. The great is the lower keyboard. And they sound, what they sound like, the diapason, for example. So it's a softer setting. It sounds like a flute. On the swell, that's the Gedakt, also another softer setting. And so as I play, I'm just going to do a little example here. So that you're going to get a variety of sounds. I will switch back and forth, and sometimes I'll have my left hand on the upper manual, my right on below, and I'll switch around. So you get a variety of sounds. So like for example, for the Alemán, in the first suite that I'm going to play, number 3, you're going to get this kind of sound. Okay, and then for the Courant, you're going to get the Gedakt. I also will be using on the great, the Forefoot, another oudie sound. And I'll be using both manuals for the saraband. I'll have the right hand down on the great manual with the Forefoot, and the left up on the swell with the Gedakt. Another example of a split shift there is the Anglais, where I'll have the upper voice in the swell, and the lower in the great. So those, that's an example of some of the differences I'll employ in there. On the harpsichord, I would do probably exactly the same thing. Harpsichords typically have 2 manuals. You have the great manual and you have the swell up top. And they have slightly different sounds because of where the different components of the nuts are as they guide the strings along the soundboard. And not only can you change up which manuals you're going to use, but you can also, and I can do this on the organ, and I will for the jigs, is you can also couple them, what that means is it takes both keyboards and it essentially, it plays both of them together. So like, for example, not that one, but for the jig, I'm going to put both of them together. So there's the lower manual, that's the Forefoot. There's the Gedakt on the swell. You put those together, it's just a little bit louder. It's harder to distinguish those 2 voices because they're both very soft. But for the jig, it's the final dance of the suite, and And so typically for our final dancing set, and this tends to be kind of a social thing, I think, is use it as kind of that final, you know, that tends to be the most exciting one, so to speak. And the jigs definitely are not only a lot more work to learn, but they're a lot more energetic. So that's just an example there. The other thing that I'm going to be doing, I will be employing some additional stops in the second suite I'm going to play, and that is that's the suite number 5 in G major. And in those ones where I'm going to throw that in there is, check out my notes here. Okay. I'm going to go to the gavotte. So, in the gavotte, take off the coupler. I'm going to be playing that one on the upper keyboard, the swell. What I'm also going to be doing with that one is I'm going to be adding a 4-foot stop. And so what's that going to do is it's going to add an additional voice that sounds an octave higher. So it's going to thicken the texture a little bit, but give it that edge that a higher voice would. The couple flute is also another flute sound. So again, it's going to be another light sound combined. Okay, so again, the difference, just the 8-foot alone, add the couple flute, the 4-foot. So you hear that difference there by adding that higher voice. I'll be doing that with another one on the great manual down below as well with one of the other dances. And then finally at the end, the jig at the end of the second suite, I will have all of those combined. So both an 8 and a 4 on each of the 2 manuals, and then of course coupled together. So that final jig is going to be the noisiest. And that goes on for a couple pages. The one thing that you won't get in this recording that you got in the last Bach recording I did is you won't get a lot of the thicker, lower text voices that I used with the toccata and the toccata in E minor that I played back in April, as well as the Capriccio. And I think stylistically, they just wouldn't go very well with these. Not to say that I haven't ever experimented with it. It was kind of fun, but it was only fun for about 2 seconds. And I was like, okay, that's enough. So, anyway, that's all I have to say for the music that I'm playing this coming Thursday night. Hope that was informative, educational, blah, 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 blah. And we'll see you Thursday night at 7:15 live. Okay, thanks.